Hi, and welcome to my winter hibernation hole. I hope you're having a lovely day. If not, I hope I can make it just a bit better. So, since I am a poet, I thought it would make sense to do a close reading of one of the poems I've written. And a close reading is really just reading a short bit of text and paying attention to the details and asking yourself what that means to you. I've picked a fairly short poem for us to start off with, 14 lines, but look at what the lines look like. In case you are an English student and you have a lot of close readings you need to do and you want a couple tips on how you could do one, or you've been doing too many and you want to see someone else do one for a change, or you just want something relaxing, quiet, calm in the background, all of y'all are welcome here, and everyone else I didn't mention, if you found me, you're definitely welcome. Let's dive right in. In my opinion, a good close reading begins by actually reading the text in its entirety, especially if it's a short one. So let's read. Why am I like this? Will I ever know happiness as well as you do? And drink two from a cup laced with mirth overflowing? I do not know. Longing for what is past is what keeps me from growing past knowing you the way I did, even if I now don't know you anymore. Time will tell me how you hold all your stars in a single file, and in good time, so will I. Now let's look at the big picture of the whole poem, see if there's any patterns we notice that run throughout. And to start, let's look at the right-hand side of each line. I don't see any real rhyme scheme. There is this repetition of past, so we can note that down. I also noticed that quite a few lines are missing end punctuation. So in this 14-line poem, at the end of the lines, we have just 2 question marks, 3 periods, and 3 em dashes. Now, are those numbers significant? Maybe, maybe not. But when you're doing a close reading, it's always safer to notice something that doesn't matter than to miss something that does. So if you notice anything, write it down. This selection of punctuation gives an air of uncertainty. The title of the poem, Why Am I Like This?, is a question, and the 2 question marks sort of corroborate that. You usually ask questions if you aren't very sure of something. Now, the periods are very interesting because I usually associate periods with certainty, right? If someone sends you a text with a period, and they don't usually do that, But let's look at the lines here that end with a period. I do not know, even if I now don't know you anymore, and so will I. 2 of those 3 lines deal with not knowing something, and the third about the future, which everyone's always uncertain of. So even though we are using the punctuation mark that I feel epitomizes certainty, we're using it to express uncertainty. Lastly, we have these em dashes, and I'll use this moment to make a PSA. Yes, generative AI loves using em dashes, and it is a good flag for when something has been written using AI. But some of us did take the effort to learn when to actually use an em dash correctly, and one of those ways is in interjections. Here it seems like the speaker is using these em dashes to interject themselves, maybe because they're not completely sure of their thoughts, or maybe because they are uncertain of the events that prompted those thoughts. Maybe they're asking themselves, did this actually happen, or did I see it this way? Gaslighting themselves, essentially. So we've looked at the right-hand side of the lines, now let's look at the middle. There's so much you can look for in the middle of a line, but for now, let's focus on meter. This isn't even a meter long, and we aren't even talking about the meter, which is the distance light travels in 1/299,792,458 of a second. Can you tell I'm a physics major? Here, we're talking about meter in the context of rhythm. Now, there's so many things you could talk about, so much technical jargon, but you can just start by counting the number of syllables in each line, because that really affects rhythm. If you've read a lot of Shakespearean plays or poems and you've noticed there's something about them that just sounds Shakespearean, even though it's not the words or the language, it might be the meter, because he wrote a lot of his poetry using lines of 10 syllables. For example, if music be the food of love, eat it. I mean, play on. Now, will I ever know happiness as well as you do? Not really seeing a pattern there, and maybe there's a pattern elsewhere in the poem, but I've counted that. There's not really anything over there. Let's now look at the left-hand side. And something I noticed is that even though not every line ends with a period or question mark, every line starts with a capital letter. Now, poets are notorious for breaking grammar rules, but usually when they do, if it's not out of like personal style, it's because they're trying to point you towards something. I want you to notice something. So let's just look at these letters: WHYAMILIKETHIS. Why am I like this? Which is the title of the poem. Neat. So that means we are actually reading an acrostic poem. And what does that acrosticness mean? Maybe it shows how this thought, why am I like this, or just self-doubt in general, it's everywhere in the speaker's life. Wherever they go, whatever they do, they ask themselves, why am I like this? They aren't very happy about themselves. They don't have much self-confidence. Or maybe because you see these letters at the start of each line, maybe at the start of any project, goal, or event that the speaker goes to, they're always asking themselves this question. Before they dive into anything, they're like, oh my god, why am I like this? There's something about themselves that they really don't like, and they're like, why am I like this, whenever they go somewhere. Or notice how this whole why am I like this thing is hiding in plain sight. Maybe it's because our speaker is not necessarily hiding what they're going through, but they're also not like advertising or shouting about it to everyone who's around them. So which interpretation is correct? Well, none of them. And all of them. People have different perspectives on this, but I believe that no one, not even the writer, has a right to declare one interpretation as more meaningful or correct than another one. This poem should have a minimum of 8 billion different interpretations. 8 billion, one for each living human today, and minimum because if for whatever reason this poem survives centuries into the future, then every human being who's ever lived or who will ever live will have a different interpretation of this poem, and they'll all be correct. So if you have a different interpretation to whatever I say here, or if you notice something that I missed, put it down in the comments and we can have a discussion about that. I wanted to address this later, but now the cat's out of the bag. Notice how I used he, him pronouns when I was referring to the speaker. I'll get into this at the very end, but based on what I know about this poem and the inspiration behind this poem, the speaker is a guy and the addressee is a girl. So after looking at the big picture of this whole poem, we can, or rather I can say that this is a poem that made me feel several emotions, from sadness to admiration and hope. And it seems to be dealing with a lack of happiness, envy perhaps, introspection, vulnerability, and uncertainty. Now, the poem starts off with a question, and in this question we are introduced to two people, the speaker and an unnamed person that they are addressing. Notice how in the second line there's a lot of repetition of these s and z sounds. That sounds a lot like hissing. And what comes to mind when you think of hissing? If we're on the same wavelength, that's probably, oh my god, snakes. Maybe the person the speaker is referring to is a snake in the sense that she betrayed him, and so it would make sense that he is bitter that she is doing better than he is after she betrayed him. But not only snakes hiss, people can hiss too. And usually when we hiss, it's to show anger or intimidation of some sorts. So maybe the speaker is sort of like threatening the addressee or taunting them in a way like, hey, you know what? Maybe I can be as happy as you are too. So here we have a second question. And I find that very interesting because usually when I hear a question, I'm expecting an answer. But instead of that answer, we are met with a second question, which ties into that whole theme of uncertainty. We are asking more questions than we're getting answers, but also deals with introspection. Look at the language used in these lines: drink, cup, laced, overflowing. These words form a semantic field, and the semantic field is just a fancy way of saying words that are related somehow. Here they're related because they all can be used to describe several images. One image that these words conjure up is a really fancy dinner party. There's drinks and cups, and there's laced linens where people are wearing lace and people are laughing. So it's a really good time and cups are overflowing. I'm Christian, so I'm also seeing an image from the Bible described in Psalm 23 verse 5, which reads in the English Standard Version, "You, that is God, prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows." Now imagine if that's the image the speaker has in his head. I deep dived into this like at 1 a.m. a couple days ago, and I wrote like a mini essay. So I'll read a paragraph out of it because I'm really proud of it. Imagine if this is the image the speaker has in his head. God is going to prepare a table for him so that this person that they've been addressing, their enemy, sees the speaker in all their glory. However, it seems to me that this speaker definitely believes in a higher power, but that it might not necessarily be the Christian God. Later, in line 12 of the poem, the persona alludes to the stars in an almost astrological way, and astrology is not exactly compatible with the Christian faith. I mention this not because I want to know whether the speaker goes to church on Sundays, but instead because I think this demonstrates a kind of desperation that has led the speaker to feel around in the dark for a higher power or something else that can give him comfort, solace, and peace, since he is not at ease with feeling unhappy. And why should he? I think this interpretation is very interesting to me as a person of faith, but I believe it is completely valid to have a reading of this poem that does not mention religion at all. I just wanted to demonstrate that when you're doing a close reading, you can call upon your personal experiences and anything else that you've read, as long as you make it relevant to whatever you are analyzing and closely reading. So up until this point, the poem has just been asking questions, but in line 6, we get our first answer. A very simple one: I do not know. Notice how the do not doesn't contract to don't, creating this air of formality like, this is serious now. Now there's two choices that the poet has made that I find very interesting. First, it's making this stanza one line long. Could that be the poet's way of saying these feelings of like envy and self-doubt and inadequacy, are those an isolating experience, much like how these words, I do not know, are isolated from everything else on the page? Second, it's the decision to continue the poem past this line. If the poet just wanted to depict the human experience, I think it would be very valid to just end it here, because it's very human to ask questions that don't have any real answers to them, answers that you just don't know, especially when you're dealing with something as abstract as your own feelings. It's interesting how the poet forces the speaker to keep going, to press on past this conclusion. And could that be the poet's way of telling us to introspect, to ask ourselves and question our feelings and our emotions and the things we tell ourselves? Here we get our first explanation of the context in which the whole poem sits. The speaker and addressee were once very close, and for whatever reason, they are no longer as close anymore. Just looking at these lines, notice that there's a lot of repetition of different kinds. So I've just noticed that the verb know or knowing appears 4 times in this entire poem. And if one of the main themes is uncertainty, or a theme is just like a big idea, then it would make sense that knowing is also a big idea and a big theme. In line 10, we have this repetition of n and m sounds. And in English, I associate these sounds with negation. So for example, you can use no, just like the word itself, no is a negation, but also you can use it as a prefix. So you can get words like nobody or nowhere or nothing. And then there's also the IN prefix that can make impossible the opposite of possible. Underneath all of this na and ma, I can't help but hear, it's almost like the speaker is saying no, 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 no. Like they're unhappy and it bothers them. Maybe you should pick it up if it bothers him. And and even and even if you just look at the words of line 10, it's really, really sad. But I'm not only hearing pain in the speaker's voice, I'm actually seeing a lot of courage in being vulnerable and being willing to be honest with himself. That kind of just goes back to what we said about the poet trying to reward vulnerability and introspection, because it's only after the speaker goes through this difficult section of 4 lines where he's trying to think about like what he's been going through and why he feels how he feels. It's only after that that the poet allows him to have hope in the next couple of lines. It's almost like the poet is saying it must rain for you to get the rainbow, that it must rain for the 4-leafed clover to grow. In the stanza, there's also quite a bit of repetition. There's a repetition of time. Also, this repetition of la, the la sound. This time, it's broken up with all these other sounds. So we've come from that repetitive na and ma in the previous stanza, but here, now that it's all broken up, it feels normal. It feels more like what you'd expect in daily conversation. It feels healthy. And it's implying that now the poet is giving the speaker like what he needs. He's helping the speaker out by giving him hope. These lines also seem to deliver a kind of uncertain certainty, if that makes sense. Just look at words like hold and single file. When I hear these words alone, I'm usually thinking of some kind of authoritarian kind of control. In the context of everything we've read so far, it feels almost like the kind of control that brings order to chaos. The speaker trying to tell the stars what to do. Guys, what do y'all think Pooja's reading of this poem would be? I'm under the impression that the poet doesn't want the reader to leave with this whole I'm in control of my own destiny kind of mentality. Not that there's anything wrong with that, it's just that doesn't seem to be where the trajectory of the whole poem wants us to end up. Even just look at the choice of verb hold. In my experience, you can never hold anything down or hold anything for all that long. It's almost like the poet wants there to be this understanding that even though the speaker wants to have all their stars in a neat little line, it's not gonna last forever. So instead of leaning to that for comfort, they should actually just acknowledge that their feelings are valid and that they suck, but they can also rely on time to run its course and heal those wounds along the way. So that's one way of looking at the interjection in line 13 as actually not an interjection from the speaker, but from the poet themselves, trying to make sure that the speaker and the reader are all on the same page, that what we are supposed to take from this poem is that we're going to let time deal with what we needed to deal with. The speaker doesn't want control. Well, maybe they do. Control is probably nice to have if you know what's going to happen in your life and you can control your future. That's all well and good. But the opening issue isn't about control, it's about happiness. And it seems like the speaker believes the happiness of the addressee comes from having their life put together. And it's almost like that's what the speaker wants. When that's not what he wants, the speaker wants happiness, and the poet is saying, you will get that happiness in good time. That's why I find it really powerful that the last two words of this poem are actually the first two words of this poem. The speaker answers their own question, will he ever know happiness as well as his op does? Yes, in good time. So I feel like there's this criticism anyone who's taking a literature class or course has, where you're wondering if any of this even matters, if we're really just pulling meaning out of thin air. If I'm being honest, when I wrote many of the poems in this book, but why am I like this in particular, I don't think I was thinking of even a quarter of the things we talked about here. But that's because when I was writing, I didn't think, I felt. In my more recent poetry, I try to be a bit more deliberate about the decisions I make, but I think it's still worthwhile to do a close reading of a text and ask yourself, what does this mean to me, or what is this trying to say? Because at the end of the day, all poetry or all art is an expression of humanity. And that's the purpose of a close reading, in my opinion, to tap into that humanity, into the humanity of the writer by tapping into your own humanity in the words that they wrote. Now, for a bit of writer's insight, which I already leaked towards the beginning of this video when I did the whole he, him for the speaker and she, her for the addressee. But we could do that because the inspiration behind this poem is a friend that I grew apart from. We were like really, really good friends, and then we no longer were friends. There was no like fallout, we kind of just drifted apart, and when I realized it ate me up inside. But it seemed like she was like living the life. Almost everything I wanted in life, she was getting and I wasn't. Did I write it with the intention of like saying introspection is good or saying that time will heal all wounds? No, I did not. I just sat down, I felt sad one day and I was like, you know what? Let's write what we're feeling. When I was doing that close reading, it was really my reader cap that was on. That wasn't necessarily like my interpretation. I have my own interpretation, but I am not going to share my interpretation of this poem because I don't want people to think that my interpretation is the correct interpretation. So thank you for doing this with me. I really appreciate the time you've chosen to spend with me today. Let me know if you liked this close reading. I have a couple more I would like to do. If you have a copy of my poetry collection, let me know if there's any poem you want me to do, or any poem like that has ever been written. If you want me to do a close reading of it, I'd love to do a close reading of it because I love doing close readings. I've been waffling for so long. Hope I made your day a bit better, and as always, you have my best.